Traumatized people simultaneously remember too little and too much. I'm ahead of the curve, also known as James Bergman, and I return to you once again today with another book review. This time it is on The Body Keeps the Score: Mind, Brain, and Body in the Transformation of Trauma, written by Bessel van der Kolk. Hopefully I got his name right. I did actually research it beforehand, and I'm pretty sure that's okay. But yeah, I am not good with names sometimes. This book was published in 2014, and as you can see here, of course, I invested in the Penguin edition of the book. It looks fantastic. I love it when they're all lined up together. It looks great. Let's go into my slight absence recently before I get more into the book. Just a minute kind of explanation. So I know that I've posted on my YouTube discussion section that I will be posting more soon. But basically I've been having a bit of a reading slump, and I've been reading books that aren't necessarily bad. It's more that I'm not really motivated to review them because I feel either I have not got enough to say about them, or I just don't think it's worth reviewing and worth your guys' time. And it's kind of combined as well with the fact that, I'm on my last year of my undergraduate studying psychology, as some of you know, and I'm really focusing on that right now. I mean, my number one goal in the next 6 months is to pass that, to do well in my university work. So yeah, that might explain why my posting hasn't been as consistent, and it might explain why it continues to not be as consistent for the next couple months. But it doesn't mean that I won't be posting. It just means that the consistency might be a bit less. So I do apologize for anyone who looks forward to my book reviews, if anybody does, or my videos. But rest assured, I've got plans and I've got ideas. The execution of those things, however, does depend on how free I am and how confident I feel with my work enough to prioritize YouTube as well. Going back to the book now. I hope you're all well, by the way. Let me know how you're doing in the comment section. It's been a while since I've been on camera, actually, and it's nice to be back. It's nice to be talking about a book that I'm really passionate about. As soon as I opened this book and I started reading this, I loved this book. I love this book. It is a fantastic book. I could not say one criticism of this piece. Okay, maybe the writing could be better in areas, maybe, but that might be a language barrier on the author's part, but the fundamental point is this book is fantastic. So the structure of this video will be kind of me talking a bit about it, and then I'm going to share some quotes. By the way, if you want to see all my notes, check out my Goodreads, and I'm going to post them all in my review once I have it out. I'll probably have it out now, so my Goodreads link is in the description. But yeah, I'll be posting all my favorite quotes from the book in my Goodreads review. But in this video, I'm only going to share 3 passages that I really liked at the end, probably. Oh, and another thing. All right, we'll get to the review soon. Maybe I'm going to put timestamps here. Who knows? Okay, but it'll be real quick. Okay, so the reason why I read this book, because I wanted to add this in as well. The reason why I actually read this book in the first place is not only because it's been recommended to me, but I am studying trauma as a module next term, and so I felt, well, I need to know what I'm talking about, and I need to know the subject before I study it officially in class. So yeah, and this is the first book on trauma that I've actually read specifically, and yeah, as you can tell, I was really not disappointed. I'm really looking forward to my trauma module. It will be really, really cool because I'm finishing my near-death experience. Sorry, not my near-death, that's my project. I'm finishing my paranormal module this term, and then yeah, I'm doing the trauma after that. Anyway, we won't go into all of that, but yeah, I started reading this because not only am I interested in trauma and I want to learn more about it, because I think it's fundamentally an area of life which we should all know about because it helps us understand other people. So to go more into the book, finally, right? Part 1 is the rediscovery of trauma. Part 2, this is your brain on trauma. Part 3, the minds of children. Part 4, the imprint of trauma. And then quite fittingly, I feel, the author added in chapters or segments, I guess, like a last part, which is dedicated to the different types of therapy for trauma, like depending on your experience and your life and the method that works for you. I really, really love that because the book could have just been this intellectual landscape of discussing trauma, going in depth about it as he does. The last section is really useful for anybody who's like, oh, okay, so I've read all this intellectual stuff about trauma and the biology, the psychology behind it. Because at heart, this is a psychology book, but he does go into the biology of trauma as well, like the brain. And I found it really, really good, actually, that this book is not only for people who are interested in learning about trauma in general, academically, or as an interest, but it's actually for some people who have perhaps had trauma, and it genuinely is a great tool. It really is, for people who have finished the book. They're like, oh, or nearly finished the book, and like, oh, well, what do I do about all this? Okay, well, I know all this knowledge, I know all these things now, but what do I do about it? And what the author does is he's like, we're not finished yet. We're not finished yet. Stay with me. And the last section is essentially where he shares loads of different therapies, possible therapies for traumatic experiences. And I just love that. I feel like the book is two things. It's in one aspect, it's this intellectual examination of trauma, the history of trauma, history of how we've treated trauma. As I said, it talks a bit about the brain and how trauma affects the brain. And the quote I will share later also goes into genetics and how that has a part to play. And it's, in a way as well, considered to be the pinnacle book of trauma, and it deserves that title entirely. Now, I do have a book to read whenever after this. I don't know when I'm going to start it, but I've got a book called Trauma and Recovery. That is an earlier book. I think that was released in like the 90s or 85 or something. And that is about, I think it's more of a practical guide on trauma. It's more of a self-help book, whereas this book is very much an intellectual piece. But don't let that put you off. It's written in a way, and I did mention the writing isn't as good. I mean, it's more the sentences and the structures of sentences, because when I was writing up my notes, I was like, but some of these passages aren't written in the most clear, concise way. Personally, I don't mind that. I'm fine with that. But like, it's not a hard book to read as well. Like, yeah, sure, it has a bit of science and it has a bit of biology and it's mainly psychology. But what I think makes this book so digestible is the fact that the author shares, and by the way, he's, of course, treated trauma for years and so on. Although, to be fair, though, I wouldn't personally say, and nor would he, that you necessarily cure trauma. You sort of live to deal with trauma. And I think that's one of the central take-home messages of the book. When I was doing therapy myself with, substance abuse individuals, I learned a lot of things there, but that's one thing that they were aware of. Like, they were like, despite being past this, like some people were like 15 years past their substance abuse, and yet they still call themselves addicts. The reason for that is once they start to not say they're an addict, right, they, in a way, introduce themselves to relapsing, right? So if you're always aware of the capacity for you to drink again or to use some kind of drug again, then it's easier to fall in that pit. So I guess that's one thing about the book. Trauma is never really cured, it's more dealt with. And that is such an important point to remember. And it also made sense about things that I've, experienced in those sessions with people, and, my other kind of work with vulnerable adults. It really did complement my experience in many ways. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to use this as well. I don't know what career I'm going to end up getting into completely yet, but as you guys know from previous videos, I am interested in psychotherapy, but I don't know. I might go into it periodically or something like that. So I've praised this book a fair bit, and there's a lot I could go into, and I said that the last thing I'm going to do is to share 3 passages that I really, really enjoyed from the book. Whether the trauma had occurred 10 years in the past or more than 40, my patients could not bridge the gap between their wartime experiences and their current lives. Somehow the very event that caused them so much pain had also become their sole source of meaning. they felt fully alive only when they were revisiting their traumatic past. This is one idea that is in the book, which I find quite interesting, that despite a traumatic experience being as potent, as disturbing perhaps as it is for somebody, what the author points out as somebody who's helping these individuals on a daily basis, he points out that, like in the quote, whilst it is their lowest moment, they actually find the most meaning in their life from their lowest moment, and they use it to propel themselves up, to soar up from it. And this is something I personally found in the sessions I've had with people. Yeah, sure, like they might have been broken, let's say, and they might perhaps even be broken in a sense, like psychologically, like really distraught because of this. And I don't mean broken in the subjective sense. I just mean like psychologically demolished, temporarily psychologically demolished, if that makes sense, right? But what a correlation is that, like the author says, paradoxically, they find the most meaning in that primary suffering, and they use it to motivate themselves. Like, how? Well, if I'm at the bottom of hell, then the only way is to go up. And that is a logic that I've come across quite a lot, and it is a really useful one. I guess one of the problems about hell, in some sense, is that it is bottomless. But that's kind of debatable. I mean, it depends on your perspective of the matter, but I feel like it's good to realize that, you know, for a tree, for example, like the roots of a tree, they have to go down, right? They have to, that their source is in the ground, right? But they have to go up. Yeah, they are forced to go up, and the tree only grows if it is already down. So in that sense, you can kind of metaphorically draw those ideas together, I think. Over the past 3 decades, psychiatric medications have become a mainstay in our culture with dubious consequences. Consider the case of antidepressants. If they were indeed as effective as we have been led to believe, depression should by now have become a minor issue in our society. Instead, even as antidepressant use continues to increase, it has not made a dent in hospital admissions for depression. The number of people treated for depression has tripled over the past 2 decades, and 1 in 10 Americans now take antidepressants. It's funny calling these my favourite passages. I mean, there was a lot to choose from, and when it came down to it, I felt that this was quite a profound thing to share with you guys. And, you know, I'm sure many of you know this already. Like, despite antidepressants being a thing, depression rates have actually got worse. And I guess the knee-jerk thought I have immediately is, just because you take antidepressant medicine doesn't mean that you won't have depression. It just means that you won't feel the depression, right? These drugs aren't to permanently extinguish these chemical imbalances or anything like that. They are merely to suppress them. And so what genuinely does something for the individual is, for example, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which the author talks about quite a bit. And it's because in trauma, whilst the author also says that elsewhere that talk therapy isn't always effective with trauma because some people just genuinely can't even get themselves to speak about it to begin with. And he says that he commends people who can do that. And, you know, I was like this guy, I really respect the author. What does in the end help people is, you know, meaning is having people around them that they can trust and feel safe around, especially for traumatized people, although it'd be really difficult at the beginning. And he has so many case studies of this, which, again, the book is so digestible because, yeah, you can be reading this really technical explanation at some point, but he spaces it out rather constantly, which is a great thing with case studies. And I'm somebody who really, really loves reading about case studies, experiences of clinicians, and you know, even in my modules, for example, like I like asking my teacher, my lecturer, about his cases and his interviews and what people have said. It's just really interesting, and that is something that's heavy in this piece. It's the double hermeneutic kind of impression that the author gets from interviewing his patients. It's really, really fascinating. Recent research has swept away the simple idea that having a particular gene produces a particular result. It turns out that many genes work together to influence a single outcome. Even more important, genes are not fixed. Life events can trigger biochemical messages that turn them on or off by attaching methyl groups, a cluster of carbon and hydrogen atoms, to the outside of the gene, a process called methylation, making it more or less sensitive to messages from the body. While life events can change the behavior of the gene, they do not alter its fundamental structure. Methylation patterns, however, can be passed on to offspring, a phenomenon known as epigenetics. Once again, the body keeps the score at the deepest levels of the organism. For a while, actually, I was fairly convinced that if we are given bad genes, then that really does fundamentally trap us in many ways in our lives, in what what we decide to eat, what things we can even digest well or not. It's our genes really do stretch quite far. Yeah, sure, our genes are the foundation for our actions, our thoughts, our behaviors. But that doesn't mean that they can't be slightly changed in their manifestation, right? And that takes a lot of CPT in some cases. That takes a lot of brain training, I guess you could say. But at the end of the day, and I've experienced this myself, like viewing other people, having sessions with them, we can overcome our predispositions, but it is difficult. But again, would it be worth overcoming these things if it were easy, right? Well, it would definitely be worth it if it was if a lot of suffering was involved, that's for sure. But on the other hand, their lives do change despite having a predisposition, let's say, to smoking and having a big issue with addiction. Because let's say their grandparents were smoking like a chimney, and then their parents were smoking like a chimney. But that doesn't mean that they're condemned to smoke. It just means that their predisposition is really high, and it's really difficult to not smoke. Like after the first cigarette, you're already hooked. Whereas I don't know, somebody like me, I don't get that instant hook. I'm not, I don't really get addicted. I don't really like that word, but I don't, some people feel like they can get addicted to things, they become maybe dependent. I'm somebody who, it's pretty hard for me to get in that position. And that is just, predispositions, like we said before. Would I recommend this book? Absolutely. Amazing book. If you are even mildly interested in trauma, check it out. If you are studying psychology, just check this out. I would just recommend this book to anyone and everyone. In fact, I do believe that learning about human psychology is one of the best choices we can make, really, as human beings, because we're always using psychology. We just don't know it. But in our interactions, in our thought process, and our behaviors, learning about trauma really helps you understand other people as well. And you kind of, if somebody is, I don't know, like if they approach you and they're not as kind one day, from a psychological point of view, there's a reason why that is. It's not just black and white necessarily that, well, they're just an asshole. Like, it's not as simple as that. I think a knowledge of trauma, a knowledge of psychology and human behavior really does help you understand people more and be more compassionate. I must say one thing though, just because we can understand why somebody does something doesn't mean we can justify why they do something. And that is a distinction that I've learned to be very, very important to have when thinking about these types of things. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's been a while since I've been on camera, as I said, and it's really cool to, to get a video out. And I really, really love this book. I'm so passionate about it. It's probably going to be on my favorites now, my favorites on Goodreads. But yeah, check out the links in the description to follow me on other platforms if you aren't already. I'll see you in the next video, whenever that will be. But yeah, leave your thoughts in the comment section below and leave a like. That would really help the algorithm. I really appreciate that. That would be great. Subscribe if you haven't already for more book reviews, for more discussions on psychology, philosophy, literature. Anyway, I'll let you go now, and yeah, I'll see you soon.